The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty plains of Nevada when rancher Jake Coleman first spotted the peculiar sight that would change his life forever. There, beneath the weathered wooden wagon abandoned by the roadside, lay a young woman with auburn hair matted with dust, her arms wrapped protectively around two small children who couldn't have been more than 4 years old. But what made the scene truly extraordinary was the sleek, dark seal that had somehow positioned itself as a guardian beside them, its intelligent eyes watching Jake's approach with surprising calm. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The woman stirred as Jake's horse drew nearer, her emerald eyes snapping open with the alertness of someone who had learned to wake at the slightest sound. She pulled the twins closer, her voice hoarse and trembling as she spoke. "Please, mister, we're not causing any trouble. We'll move along if you need us to." Jake dismounted slowly, his weathered hands raised in a peaceful gesture. At 35, he had spent enough years under the harsh Nevada sun to recognize desperation when he saw it, and this woman wore it like a second skin. Her dress, once fine fabric that spoke of better times, was now torn and stained with the evidence of countless nights spent sleeping rough. The children, a boy and a girl with matching blonde curls, peered at him with eyes far too old for their young faces. "Easy there, ma'am," Jake said softly, his voice carrying the gentle authority that came from years of calming spooked horses. "I'm not here to cause you grief. Name's Jake Coleman, and here's my land you're resting on." The seal, which Jake now realized was indeed a trained circus animal judging by the faded leather harness around its sleek body, made a soft barking sound that seemed almost conversational. The woman's hand moved to rest on the creature's head, and Jake noticed the way it leaned into her touch with obvious affection. "I'm sorry, Mr. Coleman," she said, struggling to sit up straighter while keeping the children close. "We didn't know this was private property. We've been walking for days, and when we saw the wagon, it seemed like shelter." Her voice caught slightly. But children needed rest. Jake studied the unlikely group before him. The wagon they sheltered under was one he recognized, an old circus transport that had been abandoned there months ago when the traveling show had broken down on their way through Nevada. He'd been meaning to have it hauled away, but had never gotten around to it. Now he was glad for his procrastination. "What's your name, ma'am?" he asked, crouching down to bring himself closer to their level. "Elena," she replied after a moment's hesitation. "Elena Rossetti. These are my children, Isabella and Marco." She gestured to the twins, who watched the exchange with solemn expressions. "And this is Valentino." Her hand moved to the seal, which responded to his name with another soft bark. The name struck Jake as unusual, carrying the musical quality of Italian heritage. Elena's slight accent confirmed his suspicion, though it was overlaid with years of American English. There was something exotic and worldly about her that seemed at odds with her current desperate circumstances. "You're a long way from anywhere out here," Jake observed, his tone carefully neutral. "Nearest town is 15 miles back the way you came, and there's nothing but open range for 30 miles ahead." Elena's face crumpled slightly before she composed herself. "We were with Marconi's traveling circus," she explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was a performer, an aerialist. The children, they grew up with the show." She looked down at Valentino, whose dark eyes seemed to hold an almost human understanding. "When the circus folded 3 weeks ago in Reno, most of the performers went their separate ways. I had nowhere to go, no family, no money saved." The story poured out of her then, as if the words had been dammed up for too long. She told him how she had been born into circus life, her parents Italian immigrants who had found their place in America's traveling entertainment world. She had learned to fly through the air on silks and trapeze before she could properly read, had married young to another performer who had died in a tragic accident 2 years prior, leaving her alone with the twins. "The circus was all we knew," Elena continued, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "When Mr. Marconi couldn't pay the debts anymore, he sold what he could and told us we were on our own. Some of the performers had family to go to, others had skills they could use in regular jobs. But what does an aerialist do when there's no circus?" Jake found himself drawn into her story, fascinated by this glimpse into a world so different from his own. He had built his ranch, the Copper Creek, from nothing over the past 12 years, working from dawn to dusk to carve out a living from the harsh Nevada landscape. His life was one of routine and solitude, broken only by the company of his 2 ranch hands and the occasional trip to town for supplies. "How did you end up with Valentino?" he asked, genuinely curious about the unusual bond between woman and seal. A ghost of a smile crossed Elena's face, the first hint of warmth he had seen from her. "He was my act," she said simply. "I trained him from a pup, taught him to perform alongside me. When the circus folded, Mr. Marconi was going to sell him to another show, but I couldn't bear to be separated from him. He's been with us for 6 years, and he's as much family as the children." Isabella, the little girl, spoke up for the first time, her voice sweet and clear despite their circumstances. "Mama flies in the air, and Valentino catches balls and plays music," she said proudly. "He's the smartest seal in the whole world." Marco nodded seriously. "He knows when we're sad and makes funny noises to make us laugh." Jake looked at the seal with new interest. Valentino seemed to sense the attention and performed a small flourish, balancing briefly on his flippers before settling back down beside Elena. Despite everything, Jake found himself smiling at the creature's obvious intelligence and loyalty. "Where were you headed?" Jake asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Elena's composure faltered again. "I heard there might be work in San Francisco. Other circuses, or maybe." She trailed off, clearly having no real plan beyond the desperate hope that somehow, somewhere, there would be a place for a woman with her unusual skills. The sun was climbing higher now, and Jake could see the exhaustion etched in every line of Elena's face. The children were pale and thin, their clothes as worn as their mothers. Even Valentino, despite his playful nature, looked like he had missed more than a few meals. "When did you last eat?" Jake asked, though he was afraid he already knew the answer. Elena's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "We had some bread yesterday morning," she admitted. "I've been trying to make what little we have last, but—" Jake stood up, his mind made up. "Well, that won't do at all," he said firmly. "My ranch is just a couple miles from here, and I've got breakfast cooking that's far too much for one man. Why don't you and the children come along, get some proper food in you?" Elena's eyes widened with a mixture of hope and suspicion. "Mr. Coleman, I appreciate the kindness, but we can't accept charity. I don't have money to pay you, and I won't be indebted to anyone again." "Who said anything about charity?" Jake replied, his tone casual. "Seems to me you've got some interesting skills, and I've got a ranch that could use some help. Maybe we can work something out." It was a lie, of course. Jake's ranch ran smoothly with just himself and his 2 hands, Miguel and old Pete. But looking at these desperate people, he couldn't bring himself to ride away and leave them to whatever cruel fate awaited them on the open road. Elena studied his face for a long moment, clearly trying to read his true intentions. "What kind of help?" she asked carefully. Jake thought quickly. "Well, my house hasn't had a woman's touch in, well, ever. And Miguel's wife used to come cook for us before they moved to town, so we've been making do with beans and hardtack more often than not." He gestured toward Valentino. "And I've never seen a trained seal before. Might be something the folks in town would find interesting." It was thin reasoning, but Elena seemed to grasp at this straw of hope. "You're saying you'd give us work?" "I'm saying let's get some food in those children, and then we can talk about it properly," Jake replied. "No commitments either way, just a meal and a conversation." Elena looked down at Isabella and Marco, who were watching the exchange with the quiet intensity of children, who had learned that adult conversations often determined their fate. The decision was clear in her eyes before she spoke. "All right, Mr. Coleman," she said quietly. "We accept your invitation for breakfast." Getting Valentino loaded into Jake's wagon proved to be an adventure in itself. The seal was surprisingly heavy and awkward to lift, but he seemed to understand what was happening and cooperated as best he could. Jake was amazed by the creature's intelligence and the obvious trust he placed in Elena and the children. The ride to Copper Creek Ranch took them through some of the most beautiful country in Nevada, though Jake found himself seeing it through Elena's eyes. Rolling hills, covered in sagebrush, stretched to the horizon, broken by stands of juniper and the occasional creek lined with cottonwoods. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. It was harsh country, demanding respect and hard work from anyone who tried to make a living from it, but it had its own stark beauty. Elena sat beside him on the wagon seat. The twins nestled between them while Valentino occupied the wagon bed, occasionally barking soft commentary on the passing scenery. Jake found himself stealing glances at his unexpected passengers, trying to imagine what circumstances had brought a circus family to this desperate point. "Tell me about your act," he said, genuinely curious about this world he had never encountered. Elena's face lit up with the first real animation he had seen from her. "I was a silk aerialist," she explained, her hands moving gracefully as she spoke. "I would climb long pieces of fabric suspended from the tent ceiling and perform in the air, spinning and dropping and catching myself. Valentino would be in a pool below, and part of the act involved me diving down to perform with him." "That sounds dangerous," Jake observed, though he was fascinated by the mental image. "Everything in the circus is dangerous," Elena replied with a slight smile. "But when you grow up with it, it becomes as natural as walking. My mother was a trapeze artist, my father a strongman. I was performing simple acts before I was Isabella's age," Isabella piped up. "I can do a cartwheel and walk on my hands, and I can make Valentino balance a ball on his nose," Marco added proudly. Jake found himself charmed by their enthusiasm despite their circumstances. These were children who had grown up in a world of wonder and performance, where magic was an everyday occurrence. What must it be like for them to suddenly find themselves in the mundane world of ordinary people? "Will you show me sometime?" he asked the twins, who beamed at his interest. As they crested a low hill, Copper Creek Ranch spread out before them. It wasn't the largest spread in Nevada, but Jake had built it with his own hands and was proud of what he had accomplished. The main house was a solid structure of logs and stone, built to withstand the harsh weather that could sweep across the high desert. The barn and outbuildings were well maintained, and several horses grazed in the nearby corral. Elena was quiet as she took in the sight, but Jake noticed the way her eyes lingered on the house with something that might have been longing. How long had it been since she and her children had slept under a proper roof? "It's beautiful," she said softly, and Jake felt an unexpected surge of pride at her approval. Miguel Hernandez emerged from the barn as they approached, his weathered face creasing into a smile of welcome. At 52, he had worked for Jake for nearly 8 years and had become more friend than employee. His English was accented but clear, and his easy manner quickly put Elena and the children at ease. "Jake, my friend, you bring visitors," Miguel observed, tipping his hat politely to Elena. "Welcome to Copper Creek." "Miguel, this is Elena Rossetti and her children, Isabella and Marco," Jake said, climbing down from the wagon. "And their friend Valentino." Miguel's eyebrows shot up as he noticed the seal in the wagon bed. "Dios mío, is that what I think it is?" "He's a trained seal from the circus," Elena explained, climbing down with Jake's assistance. "I hope he won't be too much trouble." "Trouble?" Miguel laughed. "Señora, in 30 years of ranch work, I have never seen such a thing. This will be a story for my grandchildren." Old Pete emerged from the house at that moment, drawn by the voices. At 68, he was supposedly retired, but he refused to leave the ranch and made himself useful with cooking and odd jobs. His grizzled face broke into a grin as he took in the unusual group. "Well, I'll be hornswoggled," he said, scratching his gray beard. "Jake, you didn't tell me you were bringing the circus to town." The next hour passed in a whirlwind of activity, as Elena and the children were welcomed into the ranch house. Pete had indeed been cooking breakfast, and the kitchen table was soon laden with eggs, bacon, biscuits, and fresh coffee. Jake watched with satisfaction as Isabella and Marco attacked their plates with the enthusiasm of children who had been truly hungry. Elena ate more slowly, her manners refined despite her circumstances, but Jake noticed she cleaned her plate thoroughly. Valentino was given a place of honor on the back porch, where Pete had set up a makeshift pool using an old watering trough. The seal seemed delighted with the arrangement and entertained them all with a series of playful dives and splashes. "I haven't seen children in this house in—" Pete mused, watching Isabella and Marco with obvious delight. "Well, never, I reckon. It's right nice to hear young voices again. After breakfast, Jake suggested that Elena and the children might like to rest while he and his men attended to the morning chores. Elena hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with accepting more help, but exhaustion won out over pride. "There's a guest room upstairs," Jake said gently. "It's not much, but the bed's comfortable and the sheets are clean." Elena's eyes filled with tears. She quickly brushed away. "Mr. Coleman, I don't know how to thank you. We haven't slept in a real bed since." "No thanks needed," Jake replied firmly. "Rest up, and we'll talk later about what comes next." As Elena and the twins disappeared upstairs, Jake found himself pacing the kitchen, his mind racing with thoughts he couldn't quite organize. In the space of a few hours, his orderly, predictable life had been turned upside down by the arrival of this desperate little family. Miguel appeared in the doorway, a knowing look on his weathered face. "She is beautiful, this circus lady," he observed casually. "I hadn't noticed," Jake lied, earning a skeptical look from his friend. "Of course not," Miguel said with a grin. "And I suppose you invited them here purely from Christian charity." Jake shot him a warning look, but Miguel just laughed and headed back outside. Pete, however, was more direct in his assessment. "That woman's been through hell," the old man said quietly, settling into his favorite kitchen chair. "Those children, too. Whatever brought them to sleeping under an old wagon, it wasn't their choice." Jake nodded, his expression serious. "She said the circus folded, left them with nothing." "Circus folk," Pete mused, shaking his head. "Always figured them for a hardy bunch, but I suppose even they got to eat. What you planning to do with them?" It was the question Jake had been avoiding asking himself. What was he planning to do? He had acted on instinct, moved by compassion, and something else he wasn't ready to name. But impulse was one thing. Long-term planning was another entirely. "I don't know," he admitted. "Give them a chance to rest and figure out their next move, I suppose." Pete studied him with eyes that had seen too much of life to be fooled by surface explanations. "Jake, boy, I've known you since you was barely older than those twins upstairs. You got a good heart, but you also got sense. You wouldn't bring strangers into your home unless something about them spoke to you particular." Jake was saved from having to respond by the sound of splashing from the back porch, followed by delighted laughter. Through the window, they could see Valentino performing an elaborate routine of flips and dives, apparently putting on a show for his own entertainment. "Now that's something you don't see every day," Pete observed with a chuckle. The morning passed quietly, with Elena and the children resting upstairs while Jake and his men went about their usual routines. But Jake found it hard to concentrate on normal tasks. His thoughts kept returning to the woman sleeping in his guest room, to the story she had told of a life so different from his own. He had been born and raised on Nevada ranches, had never traveled further than the state capital, had never seen a circus or imagined the kind of life Elena described. Her world of silk and sequins, of trained animals and death-defying acts, seemed as foreign to him as life on another planet. Yet something about her had captured his imagination in a way he hadn't experienced since. Jake cut off that line of thinking abruptly. It had been 5 years since Mary Beth Henderson had broken their engagement to marry the banker's son in Carson City. 5 years since he had decided that the solitary life of a rancher was enough for him. He had built Copper Creek into a successful operation, had created a good life for himself, surrounded by the vast beauty of the Nevada landscape. He didn't need complications. But as he worked through the morning, he found his eyes constantly drifting toward the house, wondering if Elena was truly resting, or if she was lying awake, worrying about what would happen next. The thought of her anxiety troubled him more than he cared to admit. Around noon, he heard movement from upstairs, followed by the soft murmur of voices. Elena and the children were awake. Jake found himself checking his appearance in the mirror by the kitchen door, running a hand through his dark hair and wondering when he had started caring how he looked. Elena appeared in the kitchen doorway a few minutes later, her auburn hair neatly braided, and her dress as tidy as she could make it. The few hours of rest had brought some color back to her cheeks, but Jake could still see the worry in her green eyes. "Mr. Coleman," she began formally, "I want to thank you again for your kindness. The children and I are ready to continue our journey whenever you think best." The words hit Jake like a physical blow, though he couldn't say why. Of course she was ready to leave. She had her own life to rebuild, her own path to find. He had known this was temporary from the moment he invited them to breakfast. "Where will you go?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. Elena's composure wavered slightly. "West, toward California. There are more cities there, more opportunities. Perhaps I can find work with another circus or—" She trailed off, clearly having no real plan beyond hope. "With winter coming on?" Jake asked gently. "It's already October, Elena. The mountain passes will be snowed in before you could reach California, and traveling with children." He didn't need to finish the sentence. They both knew the dangers of winter travel in the high country, especially for a woman alone, with small children and no resources. Elena's face crumpled slightly before she regained her composure. "Then we'll find somewhere to wait out the winter. There must be work in the towns, something I can do." "What kind of work?" Jake pressed, not unkindly, but realistically. "Elena, you're a circus performer. Those are specialized skills that don't translate easily to frontier towns. Most places around here, a woman alone with children." He let the implications hang in the air. The truth was harsh but undeniable. Western towns were hard places for anyone without connections or conventional skills. A woman trying to support herself and her children would face suspicion, exploitation, or worse. Elena's exotic beauty and foreign background would make her situation even more precarious. Isabella and Marco appeared in the kitchen at that moment, their faces bright with the resilience of children who had slept well and eaten their fill. They ran straight to the back porch to greet Valentino, their laughter carrying through the house like music. "They seem happy here," Jake observed, watching Elena's face as she listened to her children's joy. "They haven't laughed like that in weeks," Elena admitted, her voice soft with emotion. "But Mr. Coleman, I can't impose on your generosity any longer. You've already done more for us than anyone had a right to expect." Jake made a decision that surprised him even as the words left his mouth. "What if you didn't have to leave?" Elena's eyes widened. "What do you mean? I mean, what if there was a way for you to stay here, at least through the winter? What if I really did have work that you could do?" Elena stared at him, hope and suspicion warring in her expression. "What kind of work?" Jake's mind raced, building on the half-formed idea that had been growing all morning. "Well, Pete's getting on in years, though he'd never admit it. He could use help with the cooking and household management. And those skills you have, the circus training, there might be opportunities for that too." "I don't understand," Elena said slowly. Jake took a deep breath, feeling like he was stepping off a cliff into unknown territory. "There's been talk in town about starting some kind of entertainment for the Harvest Festival next month. Nothing fancy, just something to bring the community together. And with Christmas coming, folks are always looking for special events for their children." It was a wild idea, born of desperation to find a reason for Elena to stay, but as Jake spoke, he began to see the possibilities. Nevada towns were hungry for entertainment, for anything that broke the monotony of hard frontier life. A trained seal, a beautiful aerialist, children who could perform simple circus acts. It was exactly the kind of novelty that would draw crowds. "You're suggesting I perform?" Elena asked, her voice carefully controlled. "I'm suggesting you consider it," Jake replied. "Not full circus shows, but smaller performances. Private parties, town celebrations, maybe even teach some of the local children basic acrobatics. There's money to be made if we approach it right." Elena was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant as she considered the possibility. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I swore I'd never perform again after the circus folded. Too many bad memories, too much heartbreak when it all fell apart. This would be different," Jake said gently. "This would be on your terms, in your control. You'd be establishing yourself as a businesswoman, not just another circus performer." Through the window, they could see Valentino entertaining the twins with an elaborate routine of ball balancing and comic dives. The seal's obvious joy in performing was infectious, and even Elena couldn't help but smile at his antics. "He misses it too," she admitted. "Performing is what he was born for." These past weeks, with no audiences, no applause, I think he's been as lost as we have. Jake sensed he was making progress, and pressed gently forward. "Elena, I've lived in Nevada all my life, and I've seen how hungry people are for something beautiful, something magical. What you and Valentino can do. What you can teach Isabella and Marco. It's a gift. Maybe it's time to share that gift again, but in a new way. Elena looked at him with an expression Jake couldn't quite read. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. "Why are you so determined to help us?" It was a fair question, and one Jake wasn't sure he could answer honestly without revealing more than he was ready to admit. The truth was, something about Elena and her children had touched him in a way he hadn't expected. Their courage in the face of desperate circumstances, their love for each other, their loyalty to the unusual creature who was so clearly part of their family, it all spoke to something deep inside him that had been dormant for too long. "Maybe because I've been alone too long," he said finally, the words coming out more honestly than he had intended. "Maybe because this ranch has been missing something I didn't know it needed until you arrived." Elena's eyes widened at his candor, and for a moment Jake thought he saw something soften in her expression, but then her practical nature reasserted itself. "Mr. Coleman." "Jake," she corrected herself. "What you're suggesting sounds wonderful, but it's also a huge risk. For both of us. What if the townspeople don't accept us? What if there's no market for our performances? What if it works?" Jake interrupted gently. "What if you find a new way to use your gifts, a new kind of life for you and the children?" "Elena, the only certainty in leaving now is more hardship and uncertainty. At least here you'd have a safe place to try something new." Before Elena could respond, Isabella came running in from the porch, her face flushed with excitement. "Mama! Mama!" Valentino did the best trick ever. He balanced on his nose and caught 3 balls at once. Marco was right behind her, equally enthusiastic, and he made that funny noise that sounds like singing. The horses in the pasture came over to watch. Elena looked down at her children's shining faces, and Jake could see the moment when her decision crystallized. These children deserved stability, safety, and the chance to use the remarkable skills they had been born into. Her own fears and reservations were secondary to their welfare. If I were to consider staying," she said slowly, "what exactly would the arrangement be?" Jake felt his heart lift, though he tried to keep his expression neutral. "You'd have the guest room for as long as you needed it. In exchange, you'd help Pete with the house and cooking, and we'd work together to develop performance opportunities in town. Any money you earn from performances would be yours to keep, minus a small percentage for expenses. And Valentino would have the run of the place, as far as I'm concerned. There's a good-sized pond about a quarter-mile from the house that would suit him better than that makeshift trough on the porch." Elena was quiet for several minutes, her mind clearly working through the implications and possibilities. Finally, she looked up at Jake with an expression that held both hope and determination. "I have conditions," she said firmly. "Name them." "This is a business arrangement, nothing more. I won't be anyone's charity case, and I won't be indebted beyond what I can repay with work." Jake nodded, though something in his chest tightened at her emphasis on the purely business nature of the relationship. "Second, if this doesn't work out, if the town doesn't accept us or there's no market for what we can offer, I want your word that you'll help me and the children get to California in the spring." "You have it," Jake agreed, without hesitation. "And third," Elena's voice softened slightly, "the children come first in everything. Their safety, their happiness, their future. That's my priority above all else." "I wouldn't expect anything different," Jake replied sincerely. Elena extended her hand to him, her gesture formal and businesslike. "Then, Mr. Coleman, you have yourself a housekeeper and a circus act." Jake took her hand, noting the calluses from years of rope and silkwork, the strength in her slender fingers. "Welcome to Copper Creek Ranch, Elena Rossetti." As their hands touched, Jake felt something pass between them, a spark of connection that went beyond their business arrangement. From the look in Elena's eyes, she felt it too, though neither of them acknowledged it aloud. Outside, Valentino's barking mixed with the children's laughter, and for the first time in years, Copper Creek Ranch felt truly alive. Jake found himself looking forward to tomorrow with an anticipation he hadn't experienced in longer than he could remember. The circus had come to Nevada, and nothing would ever be the same again. 2 weeks had passed since Elena Rossetti and her children had settled into life at Copper Creek Ranch, and the transformation was remarkable. The once quiet house now buzzed with activity from dawn to dusk. Isabella and Marco had adapted to ranch life with the resilience of youth, helping Pete with simple chores and following Miguel around like eager apprentices. Their laughter echoed through rooms that had known only masculine silence for over a decade. Lena herself had thrown herself into her new role with a determination that both impressed and concerned Jake. She rose before dawn to help Pete prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, spend her mornings cleaning and organizing the house with a thoroughness that revealed her need to prove her worth, and devoted her afternoons to working with Valentino and the children on their performance skills. The pond Jake had mentioned proved to be perfect for Valentino, who spent hours diving and playing in the clear water while entertaining anyone who happened to be nearby. The ranch horses had grown accustomed to his presence, though they still watched his aquatic performances with obvious curiosity. Even the cattle seemed less skittish when the seal was around, as if his playful nature had a calming effect on the entire ranch. Jake found himself restructuring his daily routine around the rhythms of his expanded household. He lingered over breakfast to listen to Isabella's animated stories about the dreams she'd had, stories that inevitably involved flying through clouds or swimming with magical sea creatures. He made excuses to return to the house during the day, telling himself he needed to check on various household matters while secretly hoping to catch glimpses of Elena as she moved through her tasks with graceful efficiency. The changes weren't just practical, they were emotional. The house felt warmer somehow, filled with the intangible presence of family life. Fresh flowers appeared on tables. Curtains were washed and rehung to catch the light better, and the evening meals became occasions for conversation rather than silent fuel stops between work sessions. But it was the evenings that Jake treasured most. After the day's work was done and the children had been fed and bathed, Elena would often bring out a worn piece of red silk that she kept carefully folded in her small trunk. She would tie it to one of the sturdy ceiling beams in the main room and practice her aerial work, moving through routines that left Jake breathless with their beauty and apparent danger. The first time he had seen her climb the silk and begin her ethereal dance in the air, Jake had been struck speechless. Elena moved with a fluidity that seemed to defy gravity, her body telling stories through motion that touched something deep in his soul. She was poetry in motion, art made flesh, and he found himself unable to look away, even though he felt like an intruder witnessing something sacred. Isabella and Marco would watch their mother with the casual acceptance of children who had grown up around such magic, occasionally calling out suggestions or applauding particularly impressive moves. Valentino would position himself below Elena's practice area, his intelligent eyes tracking her movements as if he were still ready to catch her should she fall. "She's incredible," Pete had whispered to Jake one evening as they watched Elena flow through a routine that involved spinning drops and impossible-seeming holds. "Never seen anything like it in all my days." Jake could only nod, his throat tight with emotions he couldn't quite name. There was something about watching Elena perform that went beyond mere appreciation for her skill. She became transformed when she was on the silk, shedding the careful wariness she carried in her daily interactions and becoming something luminous and free. The practical arrangements of their partnership were developing smoothly as well. Jake had approached several prominent families in nearby Cedar Falls about the possibility of private performances for special occasions. The response had been enthusiastic, particularly from families with children who were fascinated by the idea of seeing real circus acts. Their first official performance had been for the Whitman family's daughter's 8th birthday party. Elena had been nervous to the point of being almost ill that morning, her hands shaking as she prepared Valentino's equipment and checked her silk for any signs of wear. "What if they don't like us?" she had asked Jake as they loaded the wagon for the short trip to town. "What if they think we're too strange, too foreign?" Jake had wanted to take her hands in his, to offer physical comfort along with his words of reassurance, but their business arrangement held him back. Instead, he had kept his voice steady and confident. "Lena, you're going to give those children something they'll remember for the rest of their lives. Trust me." The performance had been a triumph. Elena's aerial routine, performed from a silk suspended between 2 sturdy oak trees in the Whitmans' backyard, had left the assembled guests gasping with amazement. Valentino had charmed everyone with his ball-balancing act and his ability to play simple tunes on a set of horns that Elena had fashioned for him. Isabella and Marco had delighted the birthday girl and her friends with basic tumbling routines and a comic skit that involved them training an imaginary lion. But it was the moment when Elena had descended from her silk and invited the birthday girl to try a simple pose that had truly won over the audience. The careful way she guided the child through basic movements Her patience and encouragement had shown the assembled parents that this mysterious circus woman was not just a performer, but a gifted teacher. The $25 they earned that day had been Elena's first independent income since the circus folded, and Jake had never forgotten the expression on her face when Mrs. Whitman pressed the money into her hands. Pride, relief, and something that might have been the first tentative shoots of hope for the future. Word of the successful performance spread quickly through Cedar Falls and the surrounding ranches. Jake found himself fielding inquiries from families wanting to book the circus lady for their own events. Elena's calendar began to fill with requests for birthday parties, anniversary celebrations, and even a proposal from the town council to perform at the upcoming Harvest Festival. The success brought new challenges, however. Elena insisted on maintaining the fiction that theirs was purely a business relationship, but Jake found it increasingly difficult to ignore the growing connection between them. She had begun to relax around him, allowing glimpses of the warm, passionate woman beneath the careful facade she presented to the world. During their evening conversations on the front porch, while the children played with Valentino in the yard, Elena would share stories of her circus life that revealed her intelligence, her humor, and her deep capacity for love. She spoke of the family she had found in the traveling show, of the tragedy that had taken her husband, of her determination to build a stable life for Isabella and Marco. Jake, in turn, found himself opening up about his own past, in ways he hadn't done with anyone in years. He told her about building the ranch from nothing, about the loneliness of the bachelor life he had chosen, about his dreams for expanding Copper Creek into something even more significant. "Why didn't you marry again after Mary Beth?" Elena asked one evening, her voice soft in the gathering darkness. Jake was quiet for a long moment, watching Valentino teach the children some kind of water game in the horse trough that had become his secondary pool. "I suppose I convinced myself that being alone was easier than risking that kind of disappointment again. And now?" Elena's question was barely audible. Jake turned to look at her, taking in the way the lamplight from the house caught the auburn highlights in her hair, the gentle curve of her profile as she watched her children play. "Now I'm beginning to think I might have been wrong about a lot of things." Their eyes met for a moment that stretched into something charged with possibility, but then Isabella's laughter broke the spell, and Elena looked away, her cheeks flushed. The days grew shorter as October progressed, and with the approaching Harvest Festival, Elena's preparations became more intensive. She had agreed to perform a special routine that would incorporate not just her aerial work and Valentino's tricks, but also a segment where Isabella and Marco would demonstrate some of the skills they had learned from growing up in circus life. Jake watched her rehearse with the children and Valentino, marveling at her patience and the obvious love that flowed between the three of them. Elena was a natural teacher, able to break down complex movements into manageable steps while maintaining an atmosphere of fun and encouragement. "Mama, when I grow up, will I be as good as you?" Isabella asked one afternoon as she practiced a simple tumbling routine. Elena paused in her stretching and considered the question seriously. "Sweetheart, you'll be better than me if that's what you choose. But remember, there are many ways to fly. You might find yours has nothing to do with silk and everything to do with books or music or taking care of people." "What about you, Mama?" Marco asked. "Will you always be a circus lady?" Elena's smile faltered slightly, and Jake saw her glance in his direction before answering. "I don't know, my love. Maybe I'll find a new way to fly, too." The Harvest Festival arrived with perfect autumn weather, crisp and clear with the kind of golden light that made the Nevada landscape look like something from a painting. The entire town of Cedar Falls had turned out for the celebration, along with families from ranches scattered across the county. Elena was unusually quiet as they prepared for her performance, her stage nerves evident in the careful way she checked and rechecked every piece of equipment. She had spent hours the night before sewing sequins onto a new costume, transforming one of her old dresses into something that caught the light and emphasized the grace of her movements. "You're going to be wonderful," Jake told her as they set up the performance area in the town square. A large crowd had already gathered, drawn by curiosity about the mysterious circus woman who had taken up residence at Copper Creek Ranch. Elena nodded, but Jake could see the tension in her shoulders, the careful control she was exerting over her breathing. This performance would be different from the intimate birthday parties they had been doing. This was her debut before the entire community that would judge whether she and her children truly belonged in their midst. The show began with Valentino's routine, and the crowd's delighted laughter helped ease some of Elena's visible nervousness. The seal seemed to sense the importance of the occasion and performed with extra flourishes, his natural showmanship winning over even the most skeptical onlookers. Isabella and Marco followed with their tumbling demonstration, their childish enthusiasm infectious, as they guided volunteer children from the audience through simple acrobatic moves. Jake noticed several mothers watching with approval as Elena supervised the interactions, ensuring every child felt successful and included. But it was Elena's aerial routine that truly captivated the crowd. She had choreographed something specifically for the outdoor setting, using the silk to tell the story of a bird learning to fly. Her movements were powerful, yet graceful, earthbound struggles giving way to soaring freedom as she climbed higher and performed increasingly complex maneuvers. Jake found himself holding his breath during the more dangerous-looking drops and spins, even though he had watched Elena practice the routine dozens of times. There was something about seeing her perform in front of the entire community that made him acutely aware of both her vulnerability and her incredible strength. The performance concluded with Elena descending slowly from her silk as Valentino played a haunting melody on his horns, the children standing at attention like tiny circus professionals. The silence that followed was complete for several heartbeats before the crowd erupted in enthusiastic applause. Jake felt a surge of pride that surprised him with its intensity. This remarkable woman and her children had won over the entire town in the space of 30 minutes, transforming themselves from mysterious strangers to beloved community members through the power of their art. The celebration that followed the performance was unlike anything Jake had experienced in Cedar Falls. Elena found herself surrounded by families wanting to book future performances, by women eager to compliment her costume and ask about her techniques, by children begging to know when they might see Valentino again. Jake watched from the edge of the crowd as Elena handled the attention with grace and warmth, answering questions about her background without revealing too many personal details, accepting compliments with genuine modesty, and making each person feel heard and valued. "She's quite something, your circus lady," said Mayor Patterson, joining Jake at his observation point. "She's not my anything," Jake replied automatically, though the words felt wrong even as he spoke them. The mayor chuckled. "Son, I've been married for 32 years, and I know the look of a man who's found his match. Question is, what are you going to do about it?" Before Jake could formulate a response, Elena appeared at his side, her face flushed with excitement and lingering adrenaline from the performance. "Jake, Mrs. Henderson wants to book us for her daughter's wedding reception next month, and the Coopers are asking about Christmas performances." Her use of "us" wasn't lost on Jake, nor was the way her hand briefly touched his arm as she shared her excitement. For a moment, she seemed to forget the careful boundaries she had established, allowing her natural warmth to shine through. "That's wonderful, Elena," Jake replied, his voice softer than he intended. "You were magnificent out there." Something shifted in Elena's expression at his words, her professional excitement giving way to something more personal. "I couldn't have done it without knowing you were there," she said quietly, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that made Jake's heart race. The moment was interrupted by Isabella and Marco running up, still buzzing with the excitement of their successful performance. "Mama, did you see how many people clapped?" Isabella demanded. "And Mr. Peterson said Valentino was the smartest animal he'd ever seen." Elena laughed, pulling her children into a hug that included drops of joyful tears. "I saw everything, my darlings. You were perfect." As they loaded the wagon for the trip back to Copper Creek, Jake noticed the subtle changes in how the townspeople interacted with Elena and the children. Where there had once been curiosity and mild suspicion, there was now genuine warmth and acceptance. Children waved goodbye with promises to visit Valentino soon, mothers pressed small gifts and invitations into Elena's hands, and several prominent men made a point of shaking Jake's hand and complimenting him on his fine family. The ride home was filled with excited chatter from Isabella and Marco, who replayed every moment of their performance and made grand plans for future shows. Elena was quieter, but Jake could sense her deep satisfaction in the evening's success. "You've given them something precious," Jake said as they watched the children demonstrate new tricks for Valentino beside his pond. "What's that?" Elena asked. "Pride in who they are, in where they come from. That's a gift that will serve them all their lives." Elena was quiet for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "I grew up thinking circus life was all there was, that we were separate from the rest of the world. Tonight, watching those children try to learn tumbling, seeing their parents' faces. Maybe there doesn't have to be such a divide between circus folk and everyone else. Maybe not, Jake agreed, though he sensed there was more to her thoughts than she was sharing. That night, after the children had been tucked into bed with heads full of performance dreams, Elena lingered on the front porch longer than usual. Jake brought out 2 cups of coffee and settled into the chair beside her, content to sit in comfortable silence and watch the stars emerge in the clear Nevada sky. "Jake," Elena said eventually, her voice soft in the darkness, "can I ask you something?" "Anything." "When you found us under that wagon, what made you stop? Really?" Jake considered the question carefully, knowing that his answer might change everything between them. "Honestly? I saw a mother protecting her children, and it reminded me of something I'd been missing without realizing it." "What's that?" "Purpose beyond just surviving. Watching you with Isabella and Marco, seeing the way you'd sacrifice anything for them, it made me realize that building a successful ranch means nothing if there's no one to share it with." Elena turned to look at him, her expression serious in the lamplight spilling from the house windows. "Jake, I need you to understand something about me, about my situation." Jake felt his chest tighten with apprehension. "What is it?" "I've been on my own for 2 years now, ever since Antonio died. I learned to be independent, to handle whatever came our way without depending on anyone else. It was the only way to protect the children from disappointment." She paused, seeming to gather her thoughts. "But these past weeks here, seeing how you are with Isabella and Marco, watching you treat Valentino like he's part of the family, it's been harder and harder to maintain those walls I built around my heart." Jake felt his breath catch, hardly daring to hope that her words meant what he thought they might. "The thing is," Elena continued, her voice barely above a whisper, "I'm terrified of wanting something I can't have, of letting myself believe in possibilities that might disappear as quickly as they appeared." Jake set down his coffee cup and turned his full attention to Elena, reading the vulnerability and hope warring in her expression. "What if they don't have to disappear? What if this thing between us, whatever it is, could be something permanent?" Elena's eyes widened slightly. "Jake, you don't understand. I'm not like the women you're used to. I have no dowry, no family connections, no traditional skills. I'm a circus performer with 2 children and a trained SEAL. How could that possibly work in your world?" Jake reached out then, unable to resist taking her hand in his. Her fingers were cool from the evening air, but strong from years of aerial work, and they fit perfectly in his larger, calloused palm. "Elena, my world has been missing something essential until you arrived. You've brought life and laughter to this place, given me a reason to look forward to coming home each day. Your children have reminded me what it means to have family, and you've shown me that love doesn't have to follow conventional rules to be real." Elena stared at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying that if you're willing to take a chance on a stubborn rancher who's been alone too long, I'd like to explore the possibility of making this arrangement permanent. Not just the business partnership, but all of it. You, me, the children, even Valentino. A real family." Elena was quiet for so long that Jake began to worry he had overstepped, moved too fast, frightened her with the intensity of his feelings. But then she squeezed his hand, and when she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "Jake Coleman, are you asking me to marry you?" Jake felt his heart slam against his ribs as he realized that yes, that was exactly what he was doing, even though he hadn't planned it, hadn't prepared a proper speech, or gotten down on one knee like a gentleman should. "I suppose I am," he said, his voice rough with the magnitude of what he was offering. "Elena Rossetti, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Would you let me be a father to Isabella and Marco? Would you make Copper Creek Ranch our home, instead of just a place where you're staying temporarily?" Elena's tears spilled over then, and for a moment Jake's heart stopped, certain that her emotional response meant she was preparing to turn him down gently. But then she was laughing through her tears, her free hand coming up to cup his cheek. "Yes," she whispered, the word barely audible but carrying all the weight in the world. "Yes, Jake Coleman, I will marry you." Jake felt something fundamental shift inside his chest, a sensation like coming home after a journey he hadn't realized he was taking. He pulled Elena closer, and she came willingly, settling into his arms as if she belonged there. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, both of them aware that they were crossing a threshold that would change everything between them. But as Elena's arms wound around his neck and she responded to his touch with growing passion, Jake felt the last of his careful reserve crumble. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Elena rested her forehead against his and smiled the first completely unguarded smile he had seen from her. "I love you," she said simply, the words carrying the weight of absolute truth. "I think I have since that first morning when you helped us down from your wagon and treated us like we were precious instead of burdens." "I love you too," Jake replied, marveling at how easily the words came, how right they felt. "I love your strength, your grace, the way you light up when you perform, the way you love your children. I love that you brought magic to my ordinary life." They sat together on the porch until well past midnight, talking about their dreams for the future, making plans for their wedding, discussing how to blend their very different backgrounds into something beautiful and lasting. Elena shared more stories of her circus childhood, painting vivid pictures of the nomadic life that had shaped her, while Jake described his vision for expanding the ranch, perhaps even creating a permanent performance space where Elena could teach and perform. "We'll need to tell the children," Elena said as they finally prepared to head inside. "How do you think they'll react?" Jake asked, suddenly nervous about this crucial aspect of their future. Elena smiled, her expression soft with love and confidence. "Isabella asked me last week if you were going to be her new papa. When I told her it was complicated, she said she hoped it wouldn't be complicated for very long because you make the best pancakes and you always listen when she talks about her dreams." Jake felt his throat tighten with emotion. "And Marco?" "Marco's been following you around like you're his personal hero. Yesterday he told me he wants to learn to be a rancher like you when he grows up, but he still wants to keep performing with Valentino on weekends." The image of his future stepson torn between two worlds he loved made Jake's heart ache with tenderness. "We'll make sure he can do both," he promised. "Whatever they want to be, whoever they want to become, we'll support them together." As they climbed the stairs to their separate rooms, Elena paused outside her door and looked back at Jake with an expression that held both shyness and promise. "Sweet dreams, my darling," she said softly, the endearment rolling off her tongue with her slight accent. "Sweet dreams, my love," Jake replied, watching until she disappeared into her room before heading to his own. As he lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling and replaying every moment of their conversation, Jake marveled at how completely his life had changed in the space of a few weeks. He had gone from a solitary rancher focused solely on building his operation to a man planning a wedding and looking forward to raising children who would bring circus magic to the Nevada plains. From somewhere outside, he could hear Valentino's occasional splashing in his pond, the sound serving as a reminder that his life was about to include not just a wife and children, but also a trained seal who played musical instruments and performed comedy routines for the entertainment of ranch hands and cattle alike. The thought should have been absurd, but instead it filled Jake with deep contentment. Tomorrow he would wake up to the sound of children's laughter, to the sight of Elena practicing her aerial work in the morning light, to the promise of a future filled with love, purpose, and the occasional circus performance in the backyard. It was, Jake reflected as sleep finally claimed him, going to be the adventure of a lifetime. The morning of what should have been the happiest day in Elena's new life began with an ominous thunderclap that rattled the windows of Copper Creek Ranch. She woke to find Jake already gone, called away before dawn to help Miguel with a sick horse, leaving her alone with the children and her growing excitement about their upcoming wedding ceremony. 3 weeks had passed since Jake's proposal, 3 weeks of blissful planning and preparation for a simple ceremony that would unite their unconventional family. The entire town of Cedar Falls had embraced their engagement with enthusiasm, particularly after Elena's continued success with private performances had made her something of a local celebrity. Elena hummed softly as she prepared breakfast, her engagement ring catching the lamplight as she worked. It wasn't an elaborate piece of jewelry, just a simple gold band with a small diamond that had belonged to Jake's grandmother, but it represented everything she had never dared hope for after Antonio's death. Isabella and Marco burst into the kitchen with their usual morning energy, chattering excitedly about the ceremony scheduled for that afternoon. Elena had spent the previous evening teaching them a special routine they would perform as part of the wedding celebration, a surprise for Jake that involved Valentino playing wedding march music while the children performed synchronized tumbling passes. "Mama, do you think Papa Jake will like our surprise?" Isabella asked, using the name she had naturally begun calling Jake since learning of the engagement. "I think he'll love it, sweetheart," Elena replied, but something in her tone made Marco look up from his breakfast with the intuitive concern children often displayed. "Mama, are you worried about something?" he asked, his small hand reaching across the table to pat hers. Elena forced a bright smile, not wanting to burden her children with the strange uneasiness that had been growing in her chest since she woke. "Just wedding day nerves, my love. Every bride gets them." But as the morning progressed, Elena's inexplicable anxiety only intensified. She found herself checking the windows repeatedly, as if expecting to see something threatening on the horizon. Valentino seemed to sense her mood, abandoning his usual playful antics to stay close to her side, his intelligent eyes reflecting an alertness that matched her own. Jake returned around mid-morning, his expression grim in a way that immediately confirmed Elena's worst fears. He pulled her aside while the children were occupied with decorating the church pews with wildflowers they had gathered. "Elena, we need to talk," he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that made her stomach clench with dread. "What is it?" she asked, though part of her already knew. Miguel rode into town early this morning to pick up supplies for the wedding feast. While he was there, he heard talk at the general store. "There's a man asking questions about a circus woman with twins and a trained seal." Elena felt the blood drain from her face. "Victor Marconi," she whispered, the name tasting like poison on her tongue. Jake's expression darkened. "Who is Victor Marconi?" Elena sank into a chair, her hands trembling as the carefully constructed piece of the past months crumbled around her. "He's the son of the man who owned our circus. When his father died and the circus folded, Victor inherited all the debts and contracts." She looked up at Jake with eyes filled with terror. "Including mine." "What do you mean, including yours?" Elena's voice was barely audible as she explained the nightmare she had hoped never to face again. In the circus, performers often sign contracts that bind them for years at a time. When I married Antonio, his contract covered both of us. When he died, the contract transferred to me, and when the circus folded, Victor claimed ownership of that contract. Jake's face went white with fury. "He can't own a human being. This is America, not some feudal kingdom." "The contracts are legal documents, Jake. Victor has papers that say I owe him 3 more years of performance, and if I can't fulfill that obligation, I owe him the monetary equivalent." Elena's voice broke. $5,000. The sum hung in the air between them like a death sentence. $5,000 was more money than most people saw in a lifetime, certainly more than Elena could ever hope to earn with her small-town performances. "There's more," Elena continued, her voice hollow with despair. "Victor has a traveling show, but it's not like the family circus I grew up in. He uses his performers badly, works them until they're broken, and he has particular interest in acts involving children." Jake's expression became murderous. "He wants Isabella and Marco." Elena nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Circus-trained children are valuable. They can be taught dangerous acts that adult beginners could never master. Victor sees them as investments, not as my babies who deserve normal childhoods." The sound of children's laughter drifted in from the yard where Isabella and Marco were teaching Valentino a new trick, blissfully unaware that their world was about to be shattered again. Elena's heart broke at the thought of what she had to do. "Jake, I have to leave," she said, her voice steady despite her tears. "I have to take the children and go before Victor finds us here. I won't let him destroy your life the way he's destroyed mine." Jake's response was immediate and fierce. "Like hell you will. Elena, we're getting married today, and no circus charlatan is going to stop that from happening." "You don't understand," Elena pleaded. "Victor has legal documents. He has connections with law enforcement in several states. If he finds me here, he'll not only take me and the children, he'll make sure you're charged with harboring someone who's breaking a legal contract." Jake pulled Elena into his arms, holding her tightly as she sobbed against his chest. "Listen to me, my love. We're not running. We're not hiding. We're going to face this together, and we're going to win." "How?" Elena asked desperately. "I don't have $5,000. I can't fulfill the contract. What choice do I have?" Before Jake could answer, the sound of approaching horses interrupted their conversation. Through the window, they could see a small group of riders approaching the ranch, led by a man whose expensive clothes and arrogant bearing immediately marked him as an outsider. "Victor?" Elena breathed, recognizing the man who had haunted her nightmares for months. Jake's jaw tightened with determination. "Stay here with the children. Don't let them see what's happening, until we know how this is going to play out." Elena wanted to protest, to shield Jake from the confrontation that was about to unfold, but she knew her children's safety had to come first. She quickly gathered Isabella and Marco, explaining that they needed to stay inside and keep Valentino quiet, no matter what they heard from the yard. Jake stepped onto the front porch just as Victor Marconi dismounted from his horse, flanked by two rough-looking men who were obviously hired muscle rather than legitimate law enforcement. Victor was a small man with oily black hair and cold eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw in terms of monetary value. "Mr. Coleman, I presume," Victor said with a smile that never reached his eyes. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." "I don't believe we've been introduced," Jake replied coldly, his hand resting casually near his gun belt. "You're trespassing on my property." Victor's smile widened. "How rude of me." "Victor Marconi, owner of Marconi's Spectacular Traveling Circus. I'm here to collect my employee, Elena Rossetti, and her children, who are in violation of their performance contracts." "Mrs. Rossetti is under my protection," Jake said firmly. "And as of this afternoon, she'll be my wife. I suggest you leave my property before I have you arrested for trespassing." Victor laughed, a sound like broken glass. "Oh, Mr. Coleman, I'm afraid you've been deceived. Elena can't marry anyone without my permission, as stipulated in her contract. And I'm certainly not giving that permission when she owes me 3 years of performance or $5,000 in compensation." From inside the house, Elena listened to the exchange with growing horror. She knew Victor well enough to recognize the confidence in his voice, the certainty that he held all the cards in this confrontation. Through the window, she could see Jake's rigid posture, the barely contained fury in his stance. "Show me this contract," Jake demanded. Victor nodded to one of his companions, who produced an official-looking document from his saddlebags. "Everything is perfectly legal, I assure you. Elena Rossetti is bound to my circus until 1888, and any attempt to interfere with that contract constitutes theft of services." Jake took the document and studied it carefully, his expression growing grimmer as he read. Elena knew what he was seeing. Her signature on papers that Antonio had signed years earlier, binding language that treated her like property rather than a human being. "Even if this contract were valid," Jake said finally, "which I dispute, Elena is willing to buy out her obligation. Name your price." Victor's eyes gleamed with avarice. $5,000, paid in full immediately. Otherwise, Elena and the children come with me today." The sum was staggering, but Jake didn't hesitate. "Done. I'll have the money transferred from my bank in Carson City." Victor's smile faltered slightly, as if he hadn't expected Jake to be able to meet his demands. "I require payment immediately, in cash. Bank transfers take too long, and Elena has already cost me considerable money by running away." "Then we'll ride to town together and visit the bank," Jake countered. "I'm afraid that's not acceptable," Victor replied, his voice hardening. "Elena comes with me now, and if you can produce the money within 24 hours, I'll consider releasing her from her obligations." Elena couldn't stand it any longer. Despite Jake's instructions to stay inside, she pushed through the front door and confronted Victor directly, her fear transformed into protective fury. "I won't go anywhere with you," she declared, her voice ringing with conviction. "And you'll never lay a hand on my children." Victor's expression became genuinely predatory as he looked Elena up and down. "My dear Elena, you look well. Ranch life seems to agree with you. But I'm afraid your preferences are irrelevant. You belong to me until your contract is fulfilled." "She belongs to no one but herself," Jake said, stepping protectively in front of Elena. "And if you think you're taking her anywhere against her will, you're sadly mistaken." The tension in the yard ratcheted higher as Victor's companions moved their hands toward their weapons. Elena realized with growing horror that Jake was outnumbered, and that his determination to protect her might get him killed. "Jake, please," she said quietly. "Maybe it would be better if I just went with him." I can't bear the thought of you being hurt because of me." Jake turned to look at her, his eyes blazing with love and determination. "Elena Coleman to be. I told you we were going to face this together, and I meant it. No one is taking you anywhere." At that moment, the sound of approaching horses interrupted the standoff. Elena's heart lifted as she recognized Miguel and old Pete riding hard toward the ranch, followed by several other men she recognized as prominent citizens of Cedar Falls. Mayor Patterson dismounted first, his usually jovial expression serious as he took in the scene. "Jake, we heard there might be trouble out here. Thought you might could use some support." Behind him, Elena was amazed to see Dr. Morrison, the banker Mr. Whitfield, and several other men whose families she had performed for over the past months. They arranged themselves in a semicircle behind Jake, presenting a united front that clearly intimidated Victor's hired guns. "This is a private matter," Victor said, his confidence visibly shaken by the arrival of reinforcements. "I have legal documents." Mayor Patterson held out his hand. "Let me see those documents, if you please." Victor hesitated, clearly not expecting to have his legal claims examined by local officials. He handed over the contract with obvious reluctance. The mayor studied the papers carefully, his expression growing more skeptical with each page. "Mr. Marconi, I'm not a lawyer, but I've been in business for 30 years, and this contract seems highly irregular. The binding language is far more restrictive than any employment agreement I've ever seen." Dr. Morrison spoke up. "In fact, it appears to treat Mrs. Rossetti more like indentured property than an employee. Such contracts are illegal under federal law." Victor's face flushed with anger. "Those contracts are standard in the circus industry. Elena signed them willingly." "Elena was 17 years old when she signed this," Mayor Patterson observed, reading from the document. "Hardly old enough to understand the implications of such binding language. And this clause about her children." He looked up with disgust. "Mr. Marconi, this contract is not only immoral, it's probably illegal." Elena felt a surge of hope as she realized that the community she had come to love was rallying to her defense. These men didn't just see her as an entertainer. They saw her as one of their own, worthy of protection and support. Furthermore, Mr. Whitfield added, "I've been Elena's banker since she arrived in Cedar Falls. Her performance income over the past months has been steady and well documented. If there were legitimate debts to be paid, proper legal channels exist for collecting them." Victor's composure cracked completely. "You small-town fools don't understand the circus world. Elena ran away from her legal obligations, stole valuable property." He gestured toward Valentino, who had emerged from the house and was watching the proceedings with obvious distrust. "And cost me thousands of dollars in lost revenue. The only thing Elena stole was her own freedom," Jake said firmly. "And as for Valentino, he's not property. He's part of her family." The standoff continued for several tense minutes, with Victor clearly calculating whether he had enough firepower to enforce his claims against the assembled townsmen. Elena held her breath, knowing that the next few moments would determine the course of her entire future. Finally, Mayor Patterson spoke with the authority of his office. "Mr. Marconi, I'm ordering you and your associates to leave Cedar Falls immediately. If you have legitimate legal claims against Mrs. Rossetti, you can pursue them through proper legal channels. But you will not be permitted to harass or threaten any citizen of this community." Victor's face contorted with rage, but he was clearly outnumbered and outmaneuvered. "This isn't over," he snarled at Elena. "I have resources you can't imagine, connections in every state. I'll find another way to collect what you owe me." "No, you won't," Jake said quietly, his voice carrying absolute conviction. "Because Elena doesn't owe you anything. She never did. And if you ever come near my family again, you'll answer to me personally." The threat in Jake's voice was unmistakable, and Victor's hired guns seemed to recognize that they were facing a man who would back up his words with action. After a moment's hesitation, Victor remounted his horse, his companions following suit. "This is a mistake," Victor called back as they rode away. "All of you will regret interfering in legitimate business arrangements." But his threats felt hollow now. the bluster of a man who had lost and knew it. Elena watched the riders disappear over the horizon with a mixture of relief and lingering fear, unable to quite believe that the nightmare was really over. As the townsmen began to disperse, each offering words of support and congratulations on the upcoming wedding, Elena found herself overwhelmed by gratitude for the community that had embraced her so completely. "Thank you," she said to Mayor Patterson, her voice thick with emotion. "All of you. I don't know how to repay such kindness." The mayor smiled warmly. "Mrs. Rossetti, you've given our children wonder and our families joy. You've brought magic to our ordinary lives. If anything, we owe you." After the others had gone, Jake pulled Elena into his arms, holding her as if he would never let her go. "It's over, my love. You're free. We're free to build the life we want together." Elena clung to him, finally allowing herself to believe that they had truly won, that Victor's hold over her was broken forever. "I was so afraid," she whispered. "So afraid that I would lose you, lose this beautiful life we've built." "Never," Jake said firmly. "Elena, don't you understand? You and the children aren't just part of my life now. You are my life. There's nothing I wouldn't do to protect that." Isabella and Marco emerged from the house then, their faces bright with curiosity about the excitement they had witnessed. "Mama, is everything all right?" Isabella asked. "Are we still having the wedding?" Elena laughed through her tears, scooping both children into a fierce hug. "Yes, my darlings, we're definitely still having the wedding." The ceremony that afternoon was even more beautiful than Elena had imagined. The entire town turned out to witness the union of the rancher and the circus lady, filling the small church with warmth and celebration. Elena wore a simple white dress that the women of Cedar Falls had helped her sew, decorated with delicate embroidery that caught the light as she moved. Jake waited at the altar in his best suit, his face glowing with happiness as Elena walked down the aisle accompanied by Isabella and Marco. Even Valentino had a role in the ceremony, wearing a special harness decorated with flowers and carrying the rings in a small basket. When Pastor Wilson pronounced them husband and wife, the church erupted in cheers and applause. Jake's kiss was tender and full of promise, sealing not just their union, but their commitment to the unconventional family they had created together. The celebration that followed was like nothing Cedar Falls had ever seen. Lena, Jake, and the children performed their special wedding routine, with Valentino providing musical accompaniment and comic relief. The crowd was enchanted by the display of family unity and artistic skill, applauding enthusiastically as the new Coleman family took their bows. As the evening wound down and guests began to head home, Elena found herself standing on the porch of what was now truly her home, watching Jake teach Marco how to skip stones in Valentino's pond while Isabella performed cartwheels on the grass. "Any regrets?" Jake asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. Lena leaned back against his chest, feeling completely safe and loved for the first time in years. "Only that it took us so long to find each other," she replied softly. "We found each other when we were meant to," Jake said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "And now we have the rest of our lives to build something amazing together." As the stars emerged in the clear Nevada sky, Elena reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. She had lost everything, had found herself sleeping under an abandoned wagon with her children and their beloved seal, certain that their future held only hardship and uncertainty. But sometimes, she realized, losing everything was just the first step toward finding something better than you ever dared to dream. In Jake's love, in the acceptance of the Cedar Falls community, in the joy of watching her children thrive in their new home, Elena had discovered that magic wasn't just something you performed on silks high above an audience. Real magic was in the everyday moments, in the love of a good man who saw her strength rather than her scars, in children's laughter echoing through rooms that had been silent too long, in a trained seal who played music for ranch hands and made everyone who met him smile. The circus would always be part of who Elena was, but it no longer defined the limits of who she could become. Here at Copper Creek Ranch, surrounded by the people who had chosen to love her family, she had found something more precious than any spotlight or applause. She had found home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.